disculpas porque llegué tarde, tuve que trabajar en el Fondo de Jubilaciones y Pensiones de esta organización y naturalmente todos estamos muy preocupados de la crisis económica y el traspaso al crecimiento económico. En esta exposición que oímos, no me fijé que mencionase la aportación que hacen los estados pequeños y insulares del Caribe. A menudo nos olvidan, a pesar de que si usted piensa en buen gobierno y democracia, estamos a la cabeza de la lista. Pero al mismo tiempo me percato de que muchos de los estados pequeños del Caribe ya se han graduado del Banco Mundial y algunos de nosotros, Bahamas y Barbados, tuvimos que evitar tener que graduarnos también del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Parece que en algunos casos estamos subiendo por una escalera mecánica que baja. O sea, nos están castigando por tener éxito. Estamos encarando las realidades de tener que competir nosotros con poblaciones tan poco numerosas y tenemos que encarar las serias pruebas de nuestras vulnerabilidades y esto año a año. En el año pasado, por ejemplo, todo desastre natural en el que uno pueda pensar afectó casi a todo el Caribe, sobre todo el Caribe insular. Por eso me pregunto, ¿cómo ve usted las perspectivas económicas de los estados pequeños insulares del Caribe en una época de globalización y en una época de liberalización rápida del comercio, donde se nos presenta el desafío de que nuestros productos que fueron producidos por las potencias metropolitanas coloniales para sus mercados, pues tenemos que encarar entonces los desafíos de Europa y de los países desarrollados. Entonces, ¿cómo ve usted a unas sardinas que navegan en un mar de tiburones? Gracias. Gracias. En muchos aspectos, los problemas de una economía pequeña son el resultado de la globalización. O sea, la globalización y la liberación del comercio tienen más efecto en economía pequeña que en economías grandes. Por ejemplo, los países de Europa, por ejemplo, Suiza, que es país pequeño, sobrevive y florece por su apertura y por su comercio y por su exportación e importación. Creo que lo mismo se aplica a economías pequeñas. Cuanto más pequeña la economía, más fundamental es tener esas vinculaciones y tener una apertura y más inversiones de ida y de vuelta. Es una materia de la que podríamos hablar usted y yo durante mucho tiempo, pero mi parecer general es que en lo que se refiere a la asistencia especial debido a los tiburones. Sí, si una economía pequeña no es diversificada, por ejemplo, hay que recordar en ese caso que el comercio es un modo de diversificarse. Y si no se diversifica, entonces hay que poner mecanismos para recibir ayuda. El Fondo Monetario está diseñado para los shocks de corto plazo. Otra institución es que los bancos multilaterales tienden a ser de mayor plazo que en esto de los golpes económicos y financieros. Hay casos de éxito, pero sí se puede pensar de que los modos de mejorar el funcionamiento de instituciones como el Fondo Monetario Internacional deben existir. Un modo muy útil es que si hay más enfoque en que el Fondo Monetario dé ayuda en el caso de problemas de balance de pagos de por sí en vez de problemas a largo plazo, que al mismo tiempo que puedan recibir asistencia técnica acerca de las operaciones de las políticas monetarias y fiscales. Como dije en mi charla, son tan importantes, pero muchas gracias por su pregunta y creo que la mención del Caribe en mi charla se concentró en que sí, tengo mucho que ver con esos países como o tuve mucho que ver con esos países, Haití, la República Dominicana, pero creo que la filosofía que he tratado de presentar se aplica a Barbados, así como a los otros países del Caribe. Gracias. Tenemos un ejemplo, es la siguiente pregunta. Un señor que combina lo diplomático con lo académico, el profesor Gordon Shirley, embajador de Jamaica.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Profesor Taylor, muchísimas gracias por esta presentación tan estimulante. Mi pregunta se desprende del embajador King. Muchos de los estados del Caribe, como él lo mencionó, hemos disfrutado de un crecimiento modesto, pero suficiente como para que ahora nos hemos graduado, como se dice vulgarmente, en las instituciones financieras institucionales. O sea que parte de mi pregunta tiene que ver con estas instituciones.
Their focus has been principally on the macro stability, which, as you say, has been established or realized in some instances, and the modest rate growth, which is beginning to emerge. Your prescription was for focus on the microeconomic issues of ensuring that we have the right legal systems, and you imply the right entrepreneurial environment. So the question really is there a role for them in that? And the second piece of my question relates to the major threats which are posed by the countries of the Caribbean, meaning both the islands of the Caribbean and the rest, are related to one, natural disasters, and the second to crime, which is increasingly not a local phenomena, but a multilateral phenomena. I wonder if you might wish to speak to how we might address some of those kinds of emerging stability issues, since they have replaced the macroeconomic issues as the major threats to continued growth.
The question mainly pertains to strategies of removing the microeconomic impediments to business and to growth, especially in an environment where there can be shocks of the kind you indicate. I think this is a question more about how you how you put through reforms, how you put through good ideas in practice. At the beginning, we were talking about the mix between ideas and policy, and in some sense, getting the ideas implemented is much harder than getting the ideas themselves. I'm going back to the world of ideas, which I thought was hard, but getting the ideas put in place is even harder. So it has to do with that, and I think one of the ways you do it is to explain in simple terms to people what the benefits are. So I tend to talk a lot about small businesses and entrepreneurs being restricted by an improper rule of law, so their risks are too high, or by lack of access to credit because the banking system is not free enough. And I'm not sure this is getting at your question entirely, but if you can then talk about specific instances of a firm that has benefited from microcredit, for example, and has hired 10 people or 20 people, illustrate that by in your district going and explaining this, and so that people understand, because after all, economics is hard. I'm going back to teach economics, so in a way, it's explaining to people. I mean, democracy means explaining to people in very real terms why these technical things like microeconomic reforms, which mean very little to most people, how that really affects their lives. And I think we could do a lot more of that. And as you do that, I think we find more enthusiasm for these otherwise very difficult reforms.
Thank you. We are reaching the end of our hour, and I've just been informed that we have solved technical problems that had prevented an earlier question that was going to come in from Peru. Do we have that question?
Question is coming from Peru. Bueno, ha sido muy interesante. Buenas tardes. Ha sido muy...
Good afternoon. It's been very interesting to listen to Professor Taylor. Perhaps the most interesting point has been his conclusion. The most important, and as of now we're looking at the microeconomic reform. We've heard a diagnosis that has been raised and summed up by people who spoke before me, and this perhaps explains the divorce that we feel in Latin America between micro and macroeconomics. We're being told that we're growing with the economy in Latin America, and in the daily life, most of the population, for economics, we have other concerns. But today we've heard from Dr. Taylor that we have reform on the microeconomic level. But a minute ago, I also heard the representative of one of the Caribbean countries say that what can we do in the small islands to deal with the big sharks? Now, maybe we could say that we have to be piranhas, following on that analogy, and the issue is that, using that analogy, that there are restrictions with piranhas, and there are unequal issues in the bilateral terms. For example, with regards to subsidies. Now, this is an issue that comes into the relationship between Europe, the United States, and the developing countries. To focus strictly on the topic of the U.S. and Latin America, I would like to ask Professor Taylor, what can we do? Put him in our shoes as a negotiator. What could be done? What would you say in the long run, particularly with regards to this situation? Would you say that Peru could eliminate its protective measures in the agrarian sector and agriculture, and then the United States wouldn't uphold its tax system? Should we be piranhas on the one hand? But then what about the vegetarian regime that we're dealing with?
This is a question similar, but put forth in a very real way that has already come up, and that is how do you convince people of the benefits of reducing subsidies or opening markets more generally? And it is hard. It requires lots of work, and I think the case is there, and you've seen that in many times in history. The case is there. And I think, as I would put it this way, as a trade negotiator, you give some things up. You actually, in trade negotiations, you're frequently in a position where what you give up is actually good for your country. In other words, giving up something is really getting something so often. It's a weird situation, but when you're negotiating in trade, what you give up is really what you get. And perhaps that's one piece of advice, although most trade negotiators wouldn't appreciate it very much. I think the strategy with respect to once an agreement is forged, once the negotiation is finished, to go back and try to persuade not only the interest in Peru or interest in other countries in Latin America, but the interest in the United States as well, because it's a democracy, and in a democracy, you have to get the votes to get the thing passed, and that's what we're all trying to do at this point. We'll give the good economic arguments, but ultimately it's going to be because we have a democracy, it's going to be a political call.
Thank you, Professor Taylor. I think actually we can end on a very positive note here. If an agreement is going to last, if a relationship is going to last, there has to be something in it for all parties, for both sides. Everyone has to gain from it, and everyone has to convince and carry through within their democracies to ensure that on the basis of the benefits, stability can be maintained. We thank you very much for having joined us. We will continue with the panel discussion immediately following. Thank you.